Join the Coven.
Welcome, my coven, to the mega collab featuring 9 amazing and talented narrators. If you want to show them love, check out their channels and subscribe. Links are in the description down below.
The Shadows in the Towers, written and narrated by Creepy Clown Girl. On one of our darkest days, we would watch shadows fall from the tallest towers. No matter where we were, we watched as planes hit buildings and some even fall from the sky. Even though none of us saw each other's faces, the fact still remains that we all heard the ghostly screams from the terror that befell us all. One by one, strangers near and far would answer the call, joining together to pull victims from the crumbling walls. Voices would echo from the emergency calls from those aboard their final flights, leaving behind those forever traumatized by what they had heard. As the lines go dead, as silence falls upon the room, only broken by the sobbing faces of those who heard their final pleas from those they knew they couldn't save. As the smoke cleared and the days would come to pass, America would raise its anger against the devil's mass. The tragedy of that day has now forever been written within the darkest pages of time, leaving behind names carved within its tethered binds.
A fire faintly lit the room in a fluorescent glow, giving it a homely feeling. The warmth spread to every corner of the house. And in the edge of the room to the right stood the Christmas tree. Its dazzling beauty brought awe to the man who stood in the center of the room, who had recently come down the chimney. He was a tall man and fat at that. He was dressed in a heavy red jacket lined with white fur. His eyes sparkled as he witnessed the lights wrapped around the tree, reflecting off of the ornaments hanging on its green branches. The large man sniffed the air from the surrounding room. The smell of pine entered his nose, causing his lips to curve into a smile. He slowly stepped over to the fireplace, the fire burning as bright as ever. Above it hung velvet stockings with silver lining laced into the fabric to spell the words Dad and Sarah. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a brown bag. With a swift motion, he pulled a single candy cane out of the bag and gently placed it into the stocking named Sarah with care. He glared at the stocking named Dad for a second before breaking his ice-cold stare away. With this, he moved into the kitchen. He entered the kitchen and trudged to the counter, where a strange odor immediately struck the large man in the nose. The smell of hard liquor was accompanied by a porcelain plate set upon the table in the center of the room. There sat a glass of milk beside the freshly baked chocolate chip cookies stacked on top one of another. Pleased, the man reached for the glass and gulped the milk down He rubbed the mustache he had recently acquired off of his face with his arm and allowed his gaze to return to the cookies. He ogled them for a few seconds, hunger in his eyes. Soon after, he grabbed one and placed it in his mouth, munching the small chunks between his teeth, which were as white as snow. The crumbs fell from his mouth and into his scraggly beard as the jolly fellow continued on to the base of the stairwell. He reached his hands out to guide himself upwards until he stumbled upon the second level of the house. Paper cutouts of snowflakes hung in the long corridor. The moonlight seeped through the windows of the hall, which gave an eerie glow. The man took a step forward, which caused the wooden floor to gently creak. Halting his advance, his eyes darted around the house, not daring to move a muscle. Dust bunnies floated through the air, and silence became ever present to the point where one could hear a single pin drop. The man held his breath and then gently released it, carefully taking another step forward. With each creak, he stopped in fear of exposure. However, nobody seemed to hear the unannounced visitor. Before long, the man arrived at a wooden door near the end of the hall. He saw the door at the end of the room as well. It was where the child slept, but not soundly. The large man knew of her bruises and pain at the hands of the one she should have trusted the most. Santa knew all of the children after all. Turning his attention back to the door in front of him, he gripped the brass handle, its surface frozen. He twisted the knob and opened the door, leaving it ajar. A single figure was lying in a bed, their specific details concealed by the shadow of the room. The man walked to the side of the bed and lifted a picture that sat on the dresser. The photo contained a family, a man, a woman, and a small girl. The man smiled for a second before setting the frame down. Next to where the photo was originally positioned sat more bottles of liquor. Several bottles sat empty and several more filled to the brim, and on the floor beside the bed was a long leather belt, bloodied on the middle area. Judging by the large frame of a figure under the cover, the man presumed they were the parents in the photograph, or at least one of them. A frown crawled onto the man's face as he uncovered the sheets to reveal the father from the photograph. Enraged, the man grabbed the pillow on the other side of the bed and brought it down to the father's face. The father's body instantly began to tremble as he clawed at the large man, desperately trying to remove the pillow. It was a fruitless effort, the pillow and the might of the man proving too powerful. The inhumane strength he possessed outmatched the father's strength tenfold. The father's arm dropped down to the side of the bed as his body went limp. He wouldn't hurt her again. The jolly fellow made sure of that. Once the deed was done, the man pulled the covers over the corpse and retreated to the window at the back of the room. The silky white snow gently fell to the ground in a peaceful manner. The night sky sparkled with the twinkling stars, and the man's eyes twinkled as well. He exited the room and took a deep sigh, unhappy he had to do such things. It was when he was about to turn around and leave, however, that he remembered the door at the very end of the hall. The girl's room. The man crept forth with silent footsteps, careful not to stir the girl from her slumber. Opening the door, he found himself in a slightly lit room thanks to a small nightlight plugged into a wall. Pink snowflakes emitted from the light danced about on the blue ceiling in a soothing pattern. In the very corner of the room was a small bed in the shape of a car. The man approached it. He gently lifted the covers to reveal the body underneath them. And there, comfortably resting in bed, was the little girl from the picture frame. He stooped down to the girl's level and watched her sleep, his teeth practically touching his ears as he leaned over her and sniffed her delicate blonde hair. The girl grunted in her sleep, not seeming to notice the presence in her room. Scars and bruises covered her back and shoulders, and patches of her skin were scarred. The man licked his thumb, covering it in moist saliva. He gently cooed as he rubbed the girl's cheek, ever so slightly, as not to awake her. For several minutes, the man couldn't help but watch her until he eventually pressed his soft, moist lips against her forehead for a few seconds. He then spoke, ever so gently, into her ear, his voice raspy and queer. "Have a Merry Christmas, little girl. May all your wishes come true." With that, the jolly fat man exited the room and snuck back to the living room, where the tree still stood in all its glimmering glory. He had left a large red sack on the couch earlier, and he went to retrieve it. He brought the bag to the tree and opened the sack, withdrawing presents, toys, and all sorts of candies. After proceeding to set several presents under the tree, the man exited the cozy home. Now, in the crisp winter air, he looked back upon the house. He smirked slightly, relishing the night. He had delivered the joy of Christmas to a little girl which needed it, and for that he was proud. He walked away, his large footprints covered soon after by the fresh snowflakes which gently fell to the ground. The sun rose over the horizon, its bright orange glow cleansing the land of its darkness and revealing the shimmering snow spread across the plains. A little girl woke from her slumber and hopped out of bed. She let out a quick yawn before hustling to her parents' bedroom. Her face was dull and her energy lackluster as she reluctantly headed for her father's room. And by his bed, she hesitantly poked his body, her face a blank canvas. He didn't wake up. He hardly even showed any signs of motion at all. Again, she tried to wake him up, but to no avail. She frowned a bit at this, but not for long. She wanted to go open what presents she got from Santa. She knew that he wouldn't want her to open the presents without him there to see. And she also didn't feel like waiting for him to get up and drag himself to the tree with her either. Hanging her head low, she knew what choice she had to make. Least she's punished. She dragged herself away from the room, completely overcome with boredom. Wandering back to her room, she sat down on the edge of her bed. Her eyes wandered to the floor of her room, where the smooth beige carpet had an imprint of a foot, and a large one at that. To the North Pole. Dear Santa, I hope you and the reindeer are doing okay. I know that you are busy with the other kids, so I won't ask for a lot. All I really want is for my daddy to be okay. It's been a while since Mommy left, and Daddy has not been the same. He yells a lot more now. It hurts me. I don't know why, but I just want it to stop. Please help my daddy, Santa. It's all I want. Love, Sarah.
Creepy neighbor. So, for context, this happened over the course of 2018. This January, when he finally was evicted. I'm a 24-year-old female. I live with my husband, 26 male, and 2 sons who are 3 and 1. We live in an apartment building with 3 floors. Directly above us in early 2018, creepy neighbor walked in. I refer to him as CN. About 55 years old. Mind you, he was also a severe alcoholic. Started out harmless, CN was just overly social and liked to talk a lot when I'd smoke outside the front door of the building. I don't smoke around me, kids. After about 3 months, it escalated to if I was coming in to bring groceries, he'd ironically come out at the same time. Both of our apartments faced a parking lot, and his apartment was above mine for reference. He started coming up to my car when I pulled in to see what I was doing or where I'd gone. Would come down to the laundry room in the apartment if I was down there and tell me a variety of pervert jokes. I'm nice to a fault, so I always just giggled or said 1 or 2 words to avoid conflict. It got pretty bad to the point where if he was outside, I would pretend to be on my phone every single time I would come home, so he would leave me alone, and even that didn't always work. It became obvious because if I was coming in, he would come down the stairs, and if I didn't speak to him or ignored him, he would instantly retreat into his apartment. When I gave birth to my second son, my mom stayed with us to help with my oldest while I was in the hospital. Repeatedly offered her Xanax and would make weird comments to her as well. My final straw was when I had just given birth to my second son a month prior, so about September of 2019. My oldest fell asleep watching a movie on the couch, so I quietly went into my room to nurse my youngest. Well, within that 15 minutes, my son woke up, learned how to open doors, which he had never done before, and went roaming the hall. Thankfully, the main door locks, and the girl across the hall I'm close with instantly heard him and let him come in to play with her daughter. I know, doors were baby-proofed by the end of the night, but shit happens, and I'm thankful he didn't wander far. CN hears my son and starts to badger my neighbor who had my son about it. She says it's fine, no big deal, and that I was likely nursing the baby and would notice within a short time frame. Mind you, none of this involves him, as he wasn't the one to approach my child, but nevertheless, he takes it upon himself to go into my apartment, and instead of hollering in the front door, which I easily would have heard, he walks all the way down my hallway to my bedroom, where I'm nearly topless, with my boob out, feeding my child, and just stands there and informs me of my son. In shock and instantly uncomfortable, I say, "Can you get out of my house?" He continues to stand there and say, "Well, your son is in the hall." Still shirtless, nearly I scream, "Get out!" Put my son down and instantly get dressed up and go investigate. My son was fine and coloring my neighbor, thankfully, and even she reassured me that he was fine and there was no reason for him to get involved. She was equally mad. That was really the last straw for me, and about a month goes by, I've me avoiding him and ignoring him. I'm loading my child into the car and he comes up to me. He said something and I ignored him, and then he said something again to watch and turn around and go, "Can you just leave me the fuck alone?" Instantly drive to my landlord's office to let her know about his year-long harassment and him walking into my bedroom. I guess I was the 5th person out of 10 total apartments to complain. He even drunkenly walked into the apartment of the couple above his own, thinking it was his place. He ended up getting evicted a month later and blamed me, told the entire building he saved my child's life and I was a rotten bitch, even though it was multiple complaints from several people. No one cares for him and laughed it off. Even his brother, who lived on the 3rd floor, hated him. Turns out he up and died from his alcoholism 6 months later this June. Part of me feels bad, but also don't at all, so I guess RIP creepy neighbor.
Have you ever heard of an old game called The Theater? Yeah, didn't think so. Probably because many say it doesn't even exist. You see, The Theater was an old game released around the same time as Doom. Today, if you ever find it, it's only available on crappy bootleg CD-ROMs, which, more often than not, don't even actually contain the game. The actual legitimate copies that they say were released back in the day feature a blank cover with nothing but the sprite of what has since been named the Ticket Taker. He is simply a poorly drawn, pixelated, bald Caucasian man with large red lips wearing a red vest over a white shirt and black pants. He is completely expressionless, though some say that if you smash the disc, his face is shown as angry the next time you look at the cover, though this is just dismissed as an urban legend. What is peculiar about The Theater, though, is that there is no developer named on the jewel case, nor a game description on the back. It is simply the Ticket Taker on a white background on both sides. The game was initially known for its inability to install correctly. The installation process immediately locks up the computer when the user reaches the licensing agreement. Also strange about the licensing agreement for The Theater is that whenever the development studio is supposed to be named, the text is simply a blank line. Anyways, most people who have claimed to owning one of the original CDs say that they figured out how to install the game by simply rebooting their computer on the licensing agreement while the disc is still inside. Then they are prompted to press "I agree" on startup. Then they continue with the installation. If a player supposedly manages to find what they believe to be a working copy, they have said that the installer window will freeze and stop responding before you click your first next. But they do also say that their PCs do not lock up and it's only the installer that freezes. It is unknown if these are the actual copies or fakes, but it is widely thought that these working copies are just to draw internet attention with no proof of the installation effects. Upon proper installation, the game then starts up without any introduction besides a main menu that is simply the sprite of a movie theater's exterior on an empty city street. The title fades in, and then the 3 menu buttons: New Game, Load, Options. Selecting Options immediately crashes the game to the desktop. Load is said not to function at all, and even if you do have a saved game, nothing happens when you press it. Thus, New Game is the only working menu option. Once it is selected, you are in first-person view. You are standing in an empty movie theater lobby, with the exception of the ticket taker standing in front of a dark hallway, which one can only assume leads to the theaters. There's nothing to do but look at the poorly drawn, mostly illegible movie posters or approach the ticket taker. Once the player moves towards the ticket taker, a very low-quality sound clip plays saying, "Thank you. Please enjoy the movie," along with a speech box saying the same thing. You then walk into the hallway and the screen fades to black and you're back in the empty lobby, and you do the exact thing again and again and again. While this may sound like a really horrible game, a number of peculiar things occur as you continue to play it. The number of times you have to continue into the hall after giving your ticket to the ticket taker before the strange events happen is unknown. Most state that it's completely random and can take anywhere from first playthrough to the 400th. What happens, though, has deeply disturbed some players. The first occurrence is when the player fades back in after walking into the hallway. This time they will notice the ticket taker is completely absent. The player then, without any other options, decides to walk into the dark hallway. The sound clip and text box mentioned previously still play in absence of the ticket taker, but when the player walks into the hallways, the screen does not fade out. It goes pitch black as they walk deeper into the hall, but the player's footsteps sound clip is still playing as they continue to push the up button on their keyboard. Those claiming to have played the original game report to have felt extremely uncomfortable walking down the hallway, anticipating the whole way something horrible happening. Well, eventually a player is unable to move forward. There is nothing for a few moments before a strange sprite that is described as the ticket taker but with a swirl for a face appears and stands before the player. The original players of the game say their bodies immediately froze up and their stomachs churned when they saw this sprite, which has been appropriately named the Swirly Head Man. Nothing happens as the Swirly Head Man stands before them, then suddenly a piercing screech plays as the game glitches out. This lasts for a few minutes, with the screeching being continuous. Then the player is abruptly returned to the lobby with all the sounds and graphics being as they should be. The game continues normally for the next couple of cycles of entering the hallway, with a couple of the original players claiming the Swirly Headman would briefly appear and disappear in the corner of the screen as a brisk yelp sound effect plays. Then, at some point after meeting the Swirly Headman, the player sees the ticket taker pacing back and forth. Though there is no walking animation, the sprite's limbs are completely static, so he just hops up and down slightly as a substitute, with his eyes being wide and his mouth open to simulate a worried facial expression. Some players noted that the movie poster has been replaced with images of the Swirly Headman, which caused them to immediately turn their character's head away from the posters and approach the ticket taker. Then another different low-quality sound clip plays, but the speech box contains nothing but corrupted characters that cause whatever text that would have been in the box to be completely illegible. Due to the extremely low quality of the sound, it is debated by players what exactly the ticket taker says at this point, though it is widely agreed that he says, "Never reach the other levels." Then the screen fades out once again and returns the player back to their starting point in the lobby. But the ticket taker is gone and the hallway is blocked by a large brick wall sprite. Touching the brick wall will immediately crash the game, and that's all there is to it. No one knows what the other levels are or how to gain access to them, nor is it known why the Swirly Headman causes such acute fear in those who have seen him in the game. All the original copies of the theater have either been lost or destroyed. But the creepiest part is the fact that all the original players of the game claim to occasionally see a brief glimpse of the swirly headman out of the corner of their eyes.
A man awakens in a dark room, zip-tied to a chair, yet he does not remember how he got there. He assumes that the throbbing of his head may have something to do with the reason. As he sits there in the darkened room, his mind slowly begins to recall the events that led him to this unfamiliar place. James walks into his boss's office. Superstar Travis Murphy. This man ruled a law firm. No case too big or too small for him to take on. It simply didn't matter. He never lost, and he would do anything to keep that streak alive. What took you so long? I would have aged 10 years if you had moved any slower. Pick up the pace, or I could find your replacement by day's end if not, Travis remarked. James looks down at the floor, his demeanor stiff and cowardly. Sorry, Mr. Murphy, it won't happen again. I'll make sure to move quicker, James whispers. You're pathetic. You know that, right? You have worked as my personal secretary for years, yet you show no freaking backbone. Do you have any ambition to move up in this company? Travis laughs harshly. Sorry, sir. Thank you, sir. I will keep that in mind, sir. May be excused, sir. James fearfully spoke. His boss was clearly in a bad mood. It was always best to keep your head down and fly under his radar when he was in a mood like this. Getting to work on his daily tasks, he kept the thoughts of what his boss had said to him in the back of his mind. He is not that pathetic. He has a wife, children, and is very happy. So what if he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth? This is what he has to do in order to put food on the table and to keep his family clothed. Does this fucking bastard not realize words hurt? Seriously, sticks and stones very well may break bones, like we were taught as children. However, words can very well hurt too. The pen is mightier than the sword. This has always been one of James's favorite quotes. The reason for this is that words have started wars and ended wars. They have saved lives and ended lives. Now, to hear this fuck throwing insults around and telling me how to live my life, someone needs to put this asshole in his place, James thought to himself. The phone begins to ring as he is lost deep within his thoughts. He mindlessly answers the phone for the 100th time that day. He immediately hears the familiar voice of his sister. Katie, how are you? This is such a nice surprise, he says. He quickly realizes that she is crying, which snaps him out of his thoughts. James' tone of voice is full of concern when he speaks again. What's wrong, sis? On the other end of the phone, Katie sobs, her words caught within her throat as she struggles to catch her breath. Lexi is dead, she manages to say. These 3 words shatter James's world. He loved his niece dearly, and she was only 15 years old. How did it happen? She was hit by a car on her way home from school. The driver fled. He had crashed his car not far from where he hit her. The cops recognized that he was drunk when they got to him. His sister spoke once more. This time, she had just a little bit more composure. The line quickly disconnects. James looks up to see his boss towering over him. What do you think you're doing? You know personal calls are not to be made during work hours. Are you stupid? Or do you just want me to fire you today? I didn't make the call, sir. But I did just get the news that my niece has been killed in a hit and run today. I need to go home and be with my family. Mr. Murphy, is that okay with you, sir? James spoke. Tears welled in his eyes as he tried to keep his composure. His boss's eyes clouded with anger. Is that okay with me? No, it's not okay with me, you moron. Do you know why I came all the way out here to see what your pathetic ass was doing? It's because I just had to answer my own phone like some kind of common lawyer. We have a new case. A government official's son has been in a car accident. He hit some stupid child and is facing some serious charges. You will need to work overtime today. James stands up, his face mere inches from his boss. He has to try and do something for a change. You do realize you're defending the person that just killed my niece, don't you? You cannot take this case. Give it to someone else, sir, please. James begs him. I have worked for you for years. Do me this one favor and don't take this case. Travis looks him up and down. His expression changes from anger to one of pure amusement. You really think that you matter to me at all? This is a high-profile case, and with that comes money and prestige. Also, you're fired, so clean out your desk. Get your pathetic, cowardly presence out of my face and out of my office. If you're still here in 30 minutes, then I will have security throw you out on your ass. James, feeling defeated, cleans out his desk and leaves. He did not have much to clean out. Therefore, it only took him about a total of 10 minutes. He realized that he still had his access card upon leaving the building. Fuck it, he shouted. He would turn that stupid thing in when they called about it. First, he needed to go be with his sister. Over the next week, James did not concern himself with finding a new job or give his boss a second thought. He spent the time making arrangement for his niece's funeral and being with his sister at the trial. Finally, the day came. The evidence was open and shut. The cops found the kid in the car, drunk off his ass, with James' niece's blood on the car. However, he said he was not the driver, and the cops found him in the passenger side seat, blackout drunk. There is no evidence of a second person in the vehicle. The jury went back and deliberated for less than 30 minutes. They came back with a verdict of not guilty. This sent James into a rage. He knew his former boss had done some illegal shit to pull this one off. This is the last straw. James went home and dropped off his sister at her house. After managing to get her asleep, he considered getting drunk. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more he realized this bastard needed to learn that his actions have consequences. James got into his car late in the night, only to notice it was 6 o'clock in the morning. No one would be in the office for another 2 hours, except for Travis. My man always got there promptly at 7 o'clock. It took James about an hour to get to his former place of employment. He saw that Travis had indeed already gotten there. Upon his arrival, he took out his old access card. He hoped that it had not been deactivated yet. James slid the card in the slot. The red dot quickly turned green, granting him access. Thank God, he thought, it still works. He went to the elevator, pressed the button for the top floor of the massive structure, and waited for the doors to open. The elevator ride took maybe 5 minutes to complete, the gears grinding as the metal container moved up every floor. Before coming to an abrupt halt, the door slid open, and he quickly stepped out. He could hear his boss blasting his classical music, which he always played when he was hard at work on a difficult case. James grabbed the first heavy object that he could find before creeping into his boss's office. James, full of rage, smacked Travis in the back of the head as hard as he possibly could. Travis falls out of his chair, rolled over on the floor, and saw the face of his former secretary. As Travis's vision begins to fade, darkness quickly overtook him. His eyes closed, which left a satisfying smirk to creep across James's lips. All of that brings us up to the current moment. Travis is still sitting here in the dark room, still strapped to that wooden chair. Where the fuck are you at, James? The least you could do is show your face, you coward.
Tisk, tisk, tisk. Now, is that any way to speak to another person? An unfamiliar voice spoke. But I suppose that if you were a decent human being, then we wouldn't find ourselves in this predicament. Now would we?
Who is there? Travis yells.
Oh, I would not expect you to know who I am, but I do believe you and my brother have been introduced.
The lights turned on abruptly to reveal James standing directly in front of him. Surprise! James shouts, a wicked grin plastered to his face. Travis makes a deep, hacking noise before saliva lands on James's face. From behind Travis came the glint of a knife He received 2 quick and fairly deep cuts. The unfamiliar voice spoke once more, this time from directly behind him. Consider this the introduction to your current circumstance. If you insult me or my brother again, then you shall receive a cut for every one. If you lie to us, then you will also receive a cut. However, if you can humble yourself enough to tell us the truth, well, you may just walk out of this with your life. But I doubt you're capable of that. Finally, stepping out of the shadows, the unfamiliar voice morphs into the person to reveal James's sister, Katie. Who the hell are you? I am the mother of the child who was murdered by that piece of shit you defended. That is who I am. I should give you another cut for that, but I will give you a pass. This time, I did forget to explain one thing to you though. The more blood you lose, the more the container below collects. Once you lose enough blood, it will trigger the pressure plate. And then, if that happens, well, just have a look for yourself. Katie points upward, knife still in hand, causing Travis to look up. He sees a net filled with rocks. Sticks and stones will break your bones, and words will set you free. Let us begin with the first question. She excitedly claps. Did you, or did you not, spend the last 10 years treating my brother like your whipping boy? Travis opens his mouth to protest, yet he looks at James. I was not that bad of a boss, was I? He asks. James calmly looks at Travis before a guttural laugh escapes his throat. Not that bad. Not that bad, James yelled. You never once gave me a holiday off, and you would dock my pay if I had to leave early due to a family emergency. You were then, as you are now, a monster. A monster, and quite frankly, an absolute nightmare to work for. Travis became angry at the sight of this lesser man, laughing and mocking him. Listen, you little shit. You are a terrible employee. Always whining about your family, about hours, about not having holidays off. If you had put a little more effort into your job, then maybe, just maybe, I would have treated you better. Katie's amused expression rapidly fades as she glances at her brother. Do you want to do the honors, or should I, brother? She inquires. James reaches out, his hand grabbing the knife from his sister with a sick smile on his face. This one is all me, he says. James walks over to where his boss is being forced to sit. He roughly cuts the shirt from his boss's torso. What are you doing? Travis furrows his brow. The blade glides easy along Travis's chest 5 separate times, which cause him to tense up a bit. There's one thing that I want you to know, just in case you think this is a joke. I assure you, it's not. We're serious. You should know that this is a fight for your life, and not a silly game. James sneers. Okay, now on to question 2. Do you feel guilty for setting free the people that have ruined others' lives by committing heinous crimes against them? Honestly, no, I don't. I have done what I have done to achieve this lifestyle. I have become acquainted with it, and I would do it all over again. Travis calmly looks at Katie. Katie looks at him with a curious expression on her face. So, you are admitting that you have tampered with evidence, threatened witnesses, and asked clients to perjure themselves? Oh, what the hell. It's just us, right? Yeah, I did it. I did it all, and I loved every single second of it. You do not even understand the kind of adrenaline rush that you get from breaking the law while knowing full well that I will never be caught. Being the smartest person in the room does have its benefits after all. You feel no remorse then, not even a little guilt, for all the lives you ruined. Well, I must commend you for telling the truth. Your lack of empathy towards your fellow man cannot, no, it will not be overlooked, Katie states coldly. She grabs the knife from her brother's weak grasp, her lips pursed into a tight line as the anger builds within her and struggles to be contained. This one is all me. She walks over to Travis, one eager step at a time, Her feet stopped just before him. She calmly walks over, places the knife against his chest, firmly pressing the blade into it, piercing the flesh. The blade is slowly dragged down the entirety of his chest. Her cutting is slow and deep, which invokes a scream out of Travis, the likes of which they had not heard up until this point. Final question. Did you once hesitate to take the scumbag on as a client after finding out that he had killed my daughter, the niece of your employee, at the time, or did you not even care about my brother and his family enough to do that? Did you only care about the money? Travis looks at her. He thinks long and hard about how he should respond to this question. He knew it was inevitable for this exact question to come up, and he knows that his answer determines whether he lives or dies. Look, I know that I treated your family horribly. I deserve to be judged for my sins, but this is not how I should be punished. The court of law is how I should be punished. To answer your question, though, yes, I do regret having to take on that case of your daughter's killer. However, my boss and his boss told me I would either win the case or I would be fired. So, as you may be able to see now, I had no choice but to take the case. Katie stares at Travis, weighing his words carefully. I am not sure that you actually mean what you are saying, yet I do agree that you should be judged by a court of law for the crimes that you have committed, so we will let you go under two circumstances. First, I do not expect you to not tell the cops about your unfortunate abduction, but my brother was only following my instructions. This was not his idea in any way, so I want his name to stay out of it. Do you understand? That part is mandatory. You do not get a choice. Fine. If you want to take the blame for this, that's on you. I'll keep his name out of this. What's your second condition? Travis impatiently asks. That is the fun part. Her eyes had a menace to them, and a smile crossed her lips. Well, in the essence of the holiday season, and the need to celebrate Halloween, there are two doors. The first says trick. You can go through that door if you want, but there's no guarantee you'll get out alive. She cackles. Door 2 says treat. If you hit the upload button on the laptop setting over there, that has been recording our conversation, by the way. It is your confession on it, uploading it to the police. Then, the other door will unlock for you to get out safely, which will cause you to pay for your crimes. Now make your choice and accept your fate. Katie bends down. The blade of her knife glides underneath the ties that hold his limbs to the wooden chair. She is serious about giving him a chance to pay for what he has done. Travis, on the other hand, can't help but laugh at her. This woman must be delusional to offer such a thing like this. Do you honestly think for even a moment that I would consider uploading the stuff that I just told you? I would spend the rest of my life in jail. Travis walks over to the door labeled trick. He pulls the door open and steps over the threshold, only to be hit in the stomach by a fast-moving and solid object. Travis is caught in the shoulder and then in the head several times. As he is falling, his body hits the floor. Blood pours out of his head as he lies there limp and broken. His vision starts to blur as he hears Katie's sickening voice once more. Katie pressed the button, shutting off the pitching machine that had been hurling baseball-sized rocks at Travis. She walks over to him and whispers in his ears, "Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words would have set you free." She satisfyingly laughs. "What the hell, Katie? I thought we were planning on setting him free," James shouts. He grabs his sister by the shoulders, shaking her to provoke a response. Katie slaps her brother on the back of the head. "He set the killer of my daughter free. Do you really think he was going to live?" "You're crazy. I'm going to the cops because you've lost your goddamn mind, Katie. This is not okay. You need help." A loud bang fills the room as her brother turns to leave. James feels a sharp pain in his chest. He slowly looks down to see a small bullet wound, blood seeping out of the hole and running down his shirt. Katie walks over to him. A manic expression clouds her face. "My sweet brother, I am so sorry, but if you stand against me, you must die as well. Goodbye, my dearest brother."
Zombie Lanes by
as the noose tightens and creepy clown girl. It's April 23rd as Eric wakes up late, yet again, to get ready for school. Today is the day that they have their field trip to the bowling alley, and Eric can't wait, as it is an opportunity to be out of school all day and do something fun, and he doesn't want to miss it. Eric arrives at school a little late, but just in time to meet up with his friends in Mrs. Borzak's class, ready for the field trip. As the morning announcements conclude, the students are ushered out of class and onto a school bus by their teacher and the two chaperones, Mr. Phillips and Mr. Donahue, as they head to Pins for Less, the bowling alley. After arriving at the bowling alley, the students and their chaperones filed out of the bus and headed inside. Once inside, the teachers went to pay, and the students milled around, getting their shoes and choosing balls. The students, a class of 12, decided to split up into two groups, boys versus girls. Both teams chose their team captains, Eric for the boys and Amanda for the girls. Each team had 6 players. For the boys' team, Eric, Adam, Jose, Darnell, Jason, and Marcus. For the girls' team, Amanda, Candace, Haley, Casey, Alyssa, and Mariah. After playing for a couple of hours, Mrs. Borzak announced that it was time for lunch, so everyone stopped playing and headed to the snack bar. All of the students lined up and told the people behind the counter what they wanted, and they walked away with their trays to sit down with their friends at the tables in front of the lanes and eat. After eating lunch, the class paused for a restroom break before getting back to the game. Game 2 began when Eric realized that the other team captain, Amanda, hadn't returned from the bathroom yet, and it had been about 15 minutes already, so he sent one of her teammates to see if she was okay. Mariah volunteered to check on her. After 10 minutes of neither girl coming back, Mrs. Borzak goes to the bathroom to see what happened as the rest of the class continues to play. A few minutes pass and the two girls emerge from the restroom, looking a little bit ill, but not too worse for wear. Mrs. Borzak didn't return, but nobody noticed anything else except for the game happening. Nobody except for Jason. He seemed to be deep in thought and was acting weird every time someone bothered him. What was most concerning to him was the small bit of blood right behind Amanda's left ear. As Jason goes to dab the blood away, Amanda jerks back, stares into his eyes, and rakes her nails across his face, causing blood to pour from the wound. Jason screams in pain, but before he could do anything else, he was slammed to the floor by Amanda, who proceeded to rip his throat out with her teeth, growling like an animal as all of the others run in terror from the girl that went berserk.
all of the rest of the class and the few workers huddled in the far corner away from Amanda, too shocked to think about the exit. Then, without warning, Mariah lets out a scream and then turns to Mr. Donahue and proceeds to rip him apart as the others watch on in terror. Breaking the silence, Darnell tells everyone to run to the back of the building behind the lanes to see if there is another exit. Eric decides against it, reasoning that they could become trapped more than they already are. Jose and Adam suddenly collapse to their knees, holding their stomachs in pain. As Alyssa kneels to see what's wrong, Adam grabs her shoulders and sinks his teeth into her neck, piercing her carotid artery. During all of the commotion, the workers inch away unnoticed, heading towards the exit, and as they get outside, they use the chain that they lock up with every night to chain the doors shut and dispose of the key in a nearby sewer.
Lock your doors on the night before Christmas. Please, make sure you lock everybody in their rooms on the night before Christmas. It is very important for everybody's health. The name Santa Claus came from St. Nicholas. In Dutch, that would be Sint Nicolaas. And that is where Santa Claus got his name. I can personally attest to the fact that this is false. My father was paranoid. Very paranoid. He was also a little crazy. Maybe more than a little. We lived in a neighborhood surrounded by trees in the mountains. Growing up, a house had cameras facing every single angle of a property. Not just regular cameras either. Night vision and infrared. The night vision just made everything look grey, but the infrared was blue, and any heated signatures gave off a yellow glow. I know this because he had given me access to the cameras, and I frequently viewed them from my computer. Over the years, I've seen some weird things on these cameras, but that is a story for another time. The weirdest thing growing up was Christmas. The holiday itself wasn't weird. We got a Christmas tree, had presents, all the normal things. The weird part was the night before. My dad loves his cameras. We had them 24/7, 364 days per year. You must be confused. There's 365 days in a year. You're correct. Every year on the night before Christmas, my dad turned off every single camera. Weird thing is, this wasn't just my dad. The other houses in the neighborhood didn't have cameras or anything fancy. But some of my friends told me that they weren't allowed to leave their room, either on that night. Anyway, on the night before Christmas, after we laid out the cookies and milk, my dad would make me go to bed early. There was a lock on the outside of my door. My dad was never abusive towards me, but on the night before Christmas, he would always lock me in my room. Despite being paranoid and crazy, my dad was the nicest man I've ever known. The only time he ever scared me was how serious he got on the night before Christmas. Dallon, do not leave the fucking room, you understand me? I'll let you run around the neighborhood with your little friends, doing whatever the hell you damn well please every single day. I'll let you stay on the computer for hours, searching up God knows what, probably choking a chicken the entire day. The only one thing I ask of ya is do not leave ya room on this night, capiche? My dad had shown me hundreds of missing person reports every time I questioned this little tradition of his. He would have 20 ready to show. Of the missing people had been missing on December 26th, the day after Christmas. Spanning back years, each of these reports had a circumstance of disappearance, section that explained what the person had done shortly before the disappearance, but none of it seemed to have anything to do with Christmas. Each one was completely random, but he said that they were purposely changed, so nobody ever finds out what really happened. He will never tell me what really happened, just one of his conspiracy theories. Yeah, Dad, I know. You tell me the same thing every year. I know. 14-year-old me replied with attitude. Alright, Dan. I don't want you to be another You mean statistic? I smirked. Yes, boy. I don't want you to become a statistic. You saw all those missing person reports I showed you. All those people are gone missing on December 26th, day after Christmas, every year. That ain't gonna be my boy, he said as he walked out of my room. He was so paranoid. Did he really think Santa was going to kidnap me? Santa isn't even real. After he walked out of my room, I heard a click as he set the lock outside my door. I heard his footsteps protrude away as I turned over my computer to display the camera footage. I counted down. 3, 2, 1, 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, 0.1. And boom! Just like that, the camera footage shut off and displayed no feed connected. I felt like a psychic for being able to accurately predict the exact time it would shut off. Good night, boy! My dad shouted from across the hall from his room. Good night! I shouted back. I hated this tradition. I loved going downstairs to eat junk food in the middle of the night, and I loved checking the camera to get a glance at the weird things I saw in the woods, from time to time. But on this night, every year, I couldn't go downstairs to eat junk food, and I couldn't bring it upstairs either. No food was allowed in my room. And all that just because of my dad's paranoia. Every year, until this day, I just listened to my dad. After he shut off the camera footage and locked me in my room, I would usually just accept it and go to sleep. For some reason I just couldn't sleep. So despite my dad's wishes, I stayed up, playing computer games. Around 2 a.m, I had something on a rooftop. There were a lot of animals and other things in those woods, so it was a pretty common occurrence. But the sound I heard this time just sounded different. It sounded like something landed. Uh-oh, Santa Killer must be here, I joked to myself as I continued playing my computer game. Shortly after the thud on the rooftop, I started hearing heavy footsteps, followed up by floorboards, creaking downstairs. Goosebumps formed on my body. My breathing got a bit more frantic as I worked up sweat. What the fuck is that? I thought to myself. Then I got the thought that would prove to be the worst decision I've ever made in my life. I got onto the application that controls the cameras. I looked over the button that would reactivate the cameras and hovered my cursor over it. What if it's an intruder? I tried convincing myself. I took a deep breath that was followed by a loud gulp. Then I clicked activate. The night vision cameras switched on. There were almost 50 boxes on my screen, each one blinking on separately. After a few seconds, they were all on. I had my eyes peeled looking at each box, seeing nothing out of the ordinary. That's until I saw the living room camera, standing in the front of a dining room table. Next to the Christmas tree was a big, overweight man in a Santa suit. He had a long beard and glasses. It was a textbook definition of what Santa looked like. My eyes were wide and filled with astonishment, and an equal mix of excitement and fear filled my brain. It was exciting, but it's just weird. And it's even more weird that I can't go downstairs. What would Santa do to me if I did? As I was staring at the screen, staring at Santa eating cookies, I noticed that his hand froze right in front of his mouth. I saw him slowly lower the cookie back onto the plate. He turned around and looked directly into the camera. He slowly brought up his hand in front of him and wagged his fingers side to side. He knew I was watching him. When he did this, I slammed my hand onto the desk to boost me up, so I can drive into my bed and pretend to be asleep. I accidentally made contact with my keyboard, causing the camera to switch from night vision to infrared. What I saw on the camera wasn't Santa anymore. It was a big, fat creature with no clothes on. Its mouth was wide open, and it looked like it had a broken and detached jaw, and large oval eyes had nothing in them. It had rows of large, razor-sharp teeth in its mouth. The creature was tall, and his arms were long and deformed. At the edge of his arms were hands with sharp claws that replaced its fingers. "Dad!" I screamed. Instantly after, I heard footsteps shuffling to my room. "What did you do, boy? Why are you still awake?" he yelled as he unlocked my door and ran into my room. He looked at the computer and saw the camera footage on. I was on my bed crying. Suddenly, I could hear a heavy thud on the staircase. "Oh, you stupid son of a bitch! You stupid little boy! What have you done?" he said as my crying became hysteric. He sat down next to me, hugged me so tightly, as if it was the last time I'd ever feel his hug, and he whispered, "I love you, boy. Don't be scared. Ain't nothing gonna happen to you," he said as we heard another thud coming from the staircase. The footsteps were so heavy that there was dust coming down from the ceiling. Thud. "I don't know if you're gonna see me again, boy, but I want you to always remember what I taught you." Thud. "Why wouldn't I see you again, Dad? What is going to happen?" Thud. "We can't both escape. It wouldn't let us, boy." Thud. "Dad, I love you. I don't want to leave you," I sobbed back. Thud. My dad got up and opened a window. We were on the second floor. He picked me up. Thud. He kissed me on the cheek as a tear ran down his. Thud. He threw me out of the second-story window. I landed in some bushes below our house. I don't know if I was injured or not. I had too much adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Run, boy!" he screamed as the thuds grew faster. I took off running, through the woods when I heard the most disturbing, blood-gurgling scream I've ever heard in my entire life. I just kept running until I couldn't hear the screams anymore. That was many, many years ago. I had kept running until I tired myself out, fell asleep under a tree. I returned to the house the following morning of the 26th. There was no sign of any struggle, no blood, nothing. My dad was just gone. I checked the cameras. The footage was gone. Looking through the recordings, it was just blank for the entire night. Now I'm a father, and I have my own kids. I have kept my dad's tradition alive every night before Christmas. I don't know if that thing was isolated to my neighborhood, or if that's what Santa is for everybody. All I know is I'm not going to risk finding out. So, with all of that said, please, lock all of your doors on the night before Christmas. The next time you're awake, during the night, and you hear noises in your house, I suggest you stay in bed and keep your eyes closed. Don't get up. Don't investigate. Don't be a curious little fucker like I was. The last thing I'll leave you with is, you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. And I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. He knows when you're sleeping, and he knows when you're awake. But he doesn't care if you've been bad or good. So don't go looking for him, for your own sake.
The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the madness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with disillusion. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out of the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were incidents of half an hour. But Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his crenellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress nor egress to sudden impulse of despair or frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7. An imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at the right and left. In the middle of each wall, a tall, narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor of which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass whose color varied in accordance with prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was unfurnished and lighted with orange, the 5th with white, the 6th with violet. The 7th apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now in no one of any of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum, amid a profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro and deepened from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers, but in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly lit the room, and thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or back chamber the effect of firelight that streamed upon the dark hinges through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was within this apartment, also, that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and when the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep, exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled, as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embrace 3,600 seconds of time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for color and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure he was not. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great feat, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm. Much of what has been seen in Hernani. There were arboresque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these dreams writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock, which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff, frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now the music swells, and the dreams live, and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many tinted windows through which stream the rays of the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the 7 there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. And to him whose foot falls on sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal, more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears who indulge in the more remote gaieties of their other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirringly on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened. Perhaps that more of thought crept with more of time into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who reveled. And thus, too, it happened that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur of horror and disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited. But the figure in question had out-Heroded and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests. There are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, now seemed to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny would have difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the murmur had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of his face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares?" he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him. "Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang." At sunrise, from the battlements, it was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who, at the moment, was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the murmur had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth a hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person. And while the vast assembly, as with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the room to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured steps to which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, to the purple, to the green, through the green, to the orange, through this again, to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddened with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming onto the sable carpet, upon which most instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning with wild courage of despair, a throng of revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask, which they handled with so violent a rudeness unattended by any tangible form, and now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall, and the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.
Scientific inquiry is the examination and analysis of observable phenomena. It has been stated by scientists the world over that the scientific method is only one method of examination, and although it is the best known approach currently, its dynamics are ill-equipped to deal with constructs that cannot be observed, such as the supernatural. This is not to say that the paranormal does not exist, because science has yet to prove it. Instead, it means that the supernatural world may indeed exist, despite the implication of humanity's best-known method of inquiry, science. I like to think of myself as a scientist at heart, particular to the concepts of the social sciences. Even so, I am also a firm believer in ghosts and the happenings of paranormal events. As a child, the idea of an afterlife and what it may consist of fascinated me. As I got older, I grew away from my childish wonders and studied more academic concepts. Attaining a relatively well-paying job as a psychiatry data technician, I found the pay and benefits substantial enough for satisfaction, but the performance of duty-related tasks, such as continual transcription, became monotonous after only a few months of employment. Single, I put some money aside for the procurement of some equipment related to my passion, paranormal investigation. It's not something I had ever gotten paid to do before. Some college buddies and I used to dabble in it on the weekends, ones where we weren't consumed with our coursework, and I found it invigorating, like rattling off the dust of my childhood and making me feel alive. After a few moments of saving for and buying equipment and recruiting a couple of my friends, it wasn't long before we started researching our own first location to investigate. We knew it would have to be someplace relatively close by, as each of us had work on Monday, and we knew that we would need to receive the appropriate permission. I was hoping my investment would eventually pay off and allow me to swap in from my current, painfully boring profession for a more stimulating one. After much deliberation and a few phone calls, we were actually able to get a hold of the owner of an allegedly haunted property, only a short 45-minute drive away. The site was a cliché abandoned mental institution. I had explored a few abandoned homes before. Once I had even investigated an operating funeral home after hours, but nothing close to the size of the property which we were now hoping to examine. The interior of the institution was recorded to be well over 150,000 square feet in space. What deemed the location investigatable was the boundless reports of unexplainable noises and apparitions that were reported to echo and roam about its corridors. Incidents ranged from the occasional shadow figure, always seen with its gleaming green eyes, to reported scratching and screaming noises, said to belong to the patients that used to reside within. The great thing about this place is that reports of supernatural phenomena exceeded the period of abandonment and reached back into the time of operation. Many doctors and nurses employed at the institution reported seeing shadowy masses, usually first mistaken for a loose mental patient, and scratching within the walls. No reports of patients seeing or hearing anything unnatural was ever logged, presumably because the mentally ill are prone to seeing and reporting such events, which are usually constructs of a diseased mind. With a little research and determination, I was able to get in touch with a real estate broker employed by the agency who currently owned the property. Being a representative of his organization, the man agreed to meet with us the morning of investigation and agreed to allow us to remain overnight, unchaperoned, assuming that I was legit. Enthused, I contacted my cobbled-together team of companions and prepared myself for one hell of a weekend. We left early, meeting up at Kevin's house and hitting the open road as the sun was just beginning to rise. Sure enough, the man who had agreed to meet me was there, standing upon the steps in the front, awaiting our arrival, just as he had promised. Kevin, Chuck, and Carla began unpacking the van when we had arrived, while I walked up to greet the man. I instantly recognized the vacancy of the place, as ours and his vehicle were the only ones to be seen in the gravel lot, marking the end of the long, bumpy driveway. Walking past his black caravan, parked only a feet from our white one, I lifted a hand hello and approached him. He extended his own when I got close enough, initiating a resulting handshake. As he walked me through the building, he told me to always be vigilant of my step and surroundings, and divulged a few stories relating to noises and shadow creatures, in accordance with the location of which they occurred, helping me to mark out the spots to be investigated closely later. We walked mostly the first and second floors, having to take the stairs as a result of the elevators not working, easily signified by both the lack of power and blatant abuse by vandals over the decades that the place sat forgotten by everyone except local teenagers trying to score a good place for a beer party. Evidence of their presence was everywhere. Empty beer cans and cigarette butts littered the floor, amongst debris from crumbling plaster and fallen, deteriorated acoustical ceiling tile. Before too long, we had made our way back into the lobby area, the crew all setting up the various laptops, cameras, and other electrical equipment that would serve as our investigative tools. Once we were set and the broker left us to our thing, we spent the rest of the morning and afternoon exploring and mapping ideal locations for EVP recordings and camera equipment. Combined with these tools, one thermal camera and an EMF device for each of us, We were primed and set for recording and documenting before the onset of darkness. We spent hours that evening combing the grounds in groups and separately. No scratching, screaming, or anything worth noting, paranormally speaking. It was about 1:17 a.m. when stationary camera number 3, positioned at the end of the second floor's western corridor, began blipping with static before the monitor went black completely. Alone in the lobby, now our base of operations, I radioed the rest of the team, now exploring the east wing of the first floor, about the malfunction and that I was heading over to take a look, possibly fix the issue. They affirmed receipt of my transmission, and off I went. The stairs creaked beneath my feet, each plank groaning with age. Once at the top of the steps, using my flashlight, I made my way to the left and down the western corridor. Doors on each side, leading to rooms previously occupied by previous residents, were all open, most of which torn from a hinge, hanging in some odd fashion. The building looked as old and decrepit as one would expect a haunted structure to look, predictable in its appearance. Despite as creepy a feel that the place had, nothing frightening or physics-defying occurred on my way to the stationary camera at the end of the long hall. Not so much as a sound, except for that of my own. Nothing as I approached, and then I heard a loud bang to my left. I turned to see a man in a dirty brown coat run out from an open door behind me and take off down the hall, towards the stairs. "Hey!" I yelled, ignoring the thud noise behind me, assumedly that of the camera being tipped and knocked to the floor, and I began running after him. He proved much faster than I and was out the front door before I was able to make it to the top of the stairs. The building was supposed to be empty. This guy was likely trying to mess with our equipment, providing what we would think of as a possibly supernatural instance that was nothing more than a prank, designed for an unknown end. I tried radioing the team, but my walkie wasn't working for some odd reason. The weird happening only supported my assumptions. I figured that maybe the guy had placed a jammer somewhere in the building. Checking the whereabouts of the team on the monitors in the lobby, I headed towards their location in the eastern wing of the ground floor. I was only about halfway to where they were depicted on the monitor when I realized that they must have heard the commotion, because the three of them were now seen coming forth from the darkness and running in my direction. As I jogged up to them, I tried to explain what happened and that we should call someone, but they just ran past, ignoring my words. They must have been really shaken up, and more so than I, because I couldn't help but notice the lights on their EMF devices each was holding blinking with activity, from what I understand to be the first time in the whole time we had been there. They really didn't seem to care or notice. As they ran by and increased the distance between them and I began to jog up after them and call out. And that's when I noticed something else strange. Their footsteps, their voices, everything had an echo. Everything except my footsteps, my voice. I could no longer hear the reverberation of my vocal cords being refracted off the floors and ceilings. As I approached the well-lit lobby, I saw each one of them check the black monitor linked to the camera upstairs before instantly rushing up the stairs and to the second floor. The screen for the camera still black as I passed by, I followed them to the camera stationed at the end of the hall on the second floor's western wing. I traced their path and my previous one back to the point of which I had encountered the man. At first, as I approached them, I thought their flashlights were shining and focused upon the camera that had been knocked over. "Hey, guys!" I spoke once again. But no one responded. No one even looked at me. I peered around Kevin's left side to see a terrifying sight that shook my very soul. It took a while for my mind to grasp. I wouldn't believe it as I began shouting to my friends that I was right there. My attempts were deemed futile by a further lack of response. Slowly, I began to wrestle with the concept that my perception was shoving into my face, making it completely undeniable. Carla called the police, and they were there in about an hour. Not long after, the building was flooded with searchlights, detectives, and yellow caution tape. Upon investigation of the surrounding rooms and video footage that we had captured, I overheard a policeman tell all three of them that the man in the brown coat, seen leaving the lobby from camera 5, is named Arnie Benjamin. He was currently wanted in relation to a string of home invasion cases and had been on the run from police for a few months. Search of the rooms, nearby the upstairs camera, revealed a room in which he had been squatting in, hoping to avoid detection. Apparently, he perceived our presence as a threat and was attempting to sneak away when I happened by him. Startled, the man shot me, resulting in the thump that I had heard in the corpse that my friends had discovered. I saw it for myself. I lay up there, motionless on the floor, blood persistently leaking from the wound in the back of my broken skull, eyes red and bloodshot, skin an unnatural shade of gray. At the time, it seemed like that night lasted forever. Now, looking back, thinking about the endless days, weeks, and years that have passed since then, it looks like only moments for me. I cannot leave, and this place has forever become my eternal tomb. Science may not be able to prove its existence, but I know that the paranormal is real. I have become a part of it.
I hope you all enjoyed what you heard tonight in my first ever mega collab. Huge thank you goes to my beloved patrons for the support, and of course the contributing narrators to this video. And I wish you all the most amazing Christmas and a happy New Year.